When I first was invited to do a TEDx talk about education, I was frightened because I failed a lot of classes. I have a bad history with education, and I didn't want to go back to there. But besides this, what I used, to be frank with you, I used ChatGPT-3, for example. I used a lot of articles, and at the end, I found that ChatGPT-3 is not educated in itself. So I moved my hands and started writing, and it came out flat. It didn't have emotions, it didn't have experiences, it didn't have good talks. So what I decided to do is to improvise. Not completely, but just a little bit. So now going a little bit seriously, what is education? Besides my academic courses, what is education in general? What is a good education? What is a fit education for African people? And what the role that plays education in the enrichment of our continent and our country. For that, I have compared some data at the beginning. This is a comparison between Japan and Africa, and you can see that Japan is very small. Who here heard about Japan? Raise your hand if yes. Who here heard about Japan through anime or manga? Okay, the same people. We're not going to talk about that. Sorry. What we're going to talk about is the difference between Japan and Africa. Japan is a country. Africa is a continent. They're not the same. They cannot be comparable. And certainly, there are limited comparisons that we could make. But one of the most compelling comparisons is when we compare the GDP of Japan with the GDP of Africa. We consider that, not we consider, but statistics consider that Africa is still way beyond Japan, a small country that has no resources, a small country that has limited access to a lot of things, compared to a big continent full of resources, primary resources, human resources, people, cultures, traditions, everything. But we're still a little bit beyond. If we dig a bit deeper into what makes the difference between Japan and Africa, we could compare the distribution of GDP across different industries. And we could see that Japan, for example, even though it doesn't have a lot of resources, it has a big service, a big manufacturing sector, and other sectors like retail, real estate, etc. These sectors are basically concentrated on the e-commerce, anime, tourism, games, and technology. Japan knew the key to its development. And not only Japan, there's also Taiwan, who is rising exponentially. There are a lot of countries who discovered the keys to use their capacities for their benefits. Japan imports the resources. It doesn't export as we do in Africa. Japan imports the resources, but it makes them into great technologies. Let's take a simple example. Who here have ever played with Lego? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot of people. So imagine that you have, for example, different pieces of Legos. You could make from those Legos a train. You could make a house. You could make a small boat. You could make just a flat line. Or you could make a Star Wars, like, spaceship. And that Star Wars spaceship is very, very, very expensive. Just look it up. When you look up about the price of a Lego, a Star Wars spaceship Lego, it's really pricey. But for example, if you make just a flat line or a house, it's going to be like 10 more or 100 more less expensive. So the things, if we could take this example, the things with Africa and Japan is that Japan knew how to use the Legos that imports. It doesn't just put them like plain and simple, but it plays with them. It combines everything and make a shape out of them. And that's very important. And that's what we lack in Africa. Because in Africa, we have the Legos. We have the Legos and we have everything that we could make out of the Legos. We just don't have ideas or problem-solving ideas. That's what we lack. And that's where the role of education comes out. This is the distribution of GDP across different industries in Africa. And you could see that there's a big part of services, a big part of industry other than manufacturing, so mining, etc., and agriculture. And it's not diverse. If you compare it with Japan, Japan is very diverse. But this, it's not compelling to the eyes. And that's the thing. For example, we have a lot of copper in Africa or in Morocco. And this copper, it doesn't get used to make batteries, to make wires, to make a lot of things, to make beyond the imagination of ideas. It's only used for mainly exportations. And when the Western countries export these primary resources, we're left with nothing. So they benefit from that. They get money. They get technology. They develop their infrastructure. But us, we're still a little bit on the edge. And that's why I believe that Africa must be developed from within, and especially with an emphasis on education. Because what made Japan into what it is right now is not having resources or something like this or some magical things. It's having people who have ideas, who have problem-solving ideas, who have tons of technological innovative ideas. And we should do that, like we have people here. We are all Homo sapiens. We are not different. We all share 99% of the DNA. So there is no exception. Like if you could solve a puzzle or Lego or Crush Candy, for example, you could solve another thing. And that's not a problem. The problem is we should implement this into our system of education. We should implement this problem-solving techniques into our system of education. And we should do it ourselves, because we finally gained our independence. We finally are having our own identities reconstructed, and we should not let us down. So I believe that Africa should and must be constructed from the inside. And how to do that? That's a big question. It's not easy to answer, but I'm going to give you some tips. Although I failed some education classes, so they're going to be beneficial anyway. First of all, we have a lot of diversity inside our continent that we should benefit from. We have a lot of resources that we should exploit ourselves. We have a lot of things to do, and we're not doing that. We still be behind. We're always waiting for another country to propose a solution, another country to do this, to import, if we need a material, to import it from the outside, from here and here and here. Why not us? Why not do that by ourselves? That's the question. And I think that education is not just an accumulation of knowledge. Like, we're not going to become like Japan just by accumulating knowledge and everything. You're not going to construct something just by accumulating Legos and playing with them like, just like that, just like a baby of 5 years old or something. The education we need is an education that transforms the person, that transforms the minds and makes them into a complete, innovative people who are aware of their privilege. Because educated people are privileged. There are still a lot of people who are not educated yet in rural places or suburban areas. There are a lot of people who are struggling just to get a little bit of education. Refugees, for example. And there are a lot of people who look for a big future. And sadly, we all see in the media how the Mediterranean Sea turned out to be a cemetery of people, like dead people, just people dying, just because they want a better future. We have that future here, but we're not showing it off, and we should. And that's the thing. We were so constructed on this idea that Europe is great, that Western world is amazing, is everything, from a small age, either be it through media or, I don't know, social media too. Like, we've been always, all this time, we've been constructed with this idea of that we're gonna have a prosperous life if we go outside. But we don't know how much people die outside in the Western world. Of course, there is not a big poverty problem like we have in Africa, but there are a lot of problems. a lot of problems out there. And besides this idea of problems in everything, the thing that we should look for is to just believe that we have a future here, and that we have a career here, and that we could make this continent better. That we don't need to, like, this continent doesn't need to give away the souls of its people. When I was young, I always had this fear that I am not gonna succeed. I'm not gonna like have a good formation. I was also in this idea that in our country or in Africa in general, you can't get a better education if you just went through public school through your whole life. And oh man, I went from this to this. It wasn't easy. I had a lot of obstacles. I had a lot of bad experiences that just happened. And I fought for it. And to be honest with you, how did I get to this? I just read a book, like, How to Get to Leaks in 10 days. And it worked. But seriously, though, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of problems that, like, I'm not just gonna give a single model, because having a single model or, like, a single experience doesn't allow to have different experiences. Because we could have a better future, a great future, if we just go through different departments or different sectors, and especially the social sectors and the cultural and the artsy sectors. Those are the sectors that need a lot of creativity, and not a lot of people succeed in them. And we need that in Africa too. It's not just for the rich to paint. It's not just for the rich. To paint is to put history into colors, to put your ideas into colors, to put everything you have in your imagination into colors. But I don't have so long, so here, just don't forget to, like what I said, education is, if you have to go with one single idea here, is that education is not an accumulation of knowledge. Education is rather a process, a long-term process of changing your person, knowing a lot of things, transforming your person, and especially encountering the people you know and your culture. And finally, don't hesitate to chase your dreams, even if they are in the Western countries, in Europe. Chase them, because they're gonna put you in front of the reality, and you're gonna see the dreams that you had confronted with the reality where you are. So chase those dreams if you want, but just remember to be the person you needed when you were young. Thank you.